Cambodian genocide. The Cambodian genocide was the systematic persecution and killing of Cambodian citizens by the Khmer Rouge under the leadership of Communist Party of Kampuchea General Secretary Pol Pot, who radically pushed Cambodia towards an entirely self-sufficient agrarian socialist society. It resulted in the deaths of 1.5 to 2 million people from 1975 to 1979, nearly a quarter of Cambodia's population in 1975. See, 7.8 million. Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge had long been supported by the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, and its chairman, Mao Zedong. It is estimated that at least 90% of the foreign aid which the Khmer Rouge received came from China, including at least $1 billion in interest-free economic and military aid in 1975 alone. After it seized power in April 1975, the Khmer Rouge wanted to turn the country into an agrarian socialist republic, founded on the policies of ultramaoism and influenced by the Cultural Revolution. Pol Pot and other Khmer Rouge officials met with Mao in Beijing in June 1975, receiving approval and advice, while high-ranking CCP officials such as Politburo Standing Committee member Zhang Chunqiao later visited Cambodia to offer help. To fulfill its goals, the Khmer Rouge emptied the cities and forced Cambodians to relocate to labor camps in the countryside, where mass executions, forced labor, physical abuse, malnutrition, and disease were rampant. In 1976, the Khmer Rouge renamed the country Democratic Kampuchea. The massacres ended when the Vietnamese military invaded in 1978 and toppled the Khmer Rouge regime. By January 1979, 1.5 to 2 million people had died due to the Khmer Rouge's policies, including 200,000 to 300,000 Chinese Cambodians, 90,000 to 500,000 Cambodian Cham, who are mostly Muslim, and 20,000 Vietnamese Cambodians. 20,000 people passed through the security prison 21, one of the 196 prisons the Khmer Rouge operated, and only 7 adults survived. The prisoners were taken to the killing fields, where they were executed, often with pickaxes, to save bullets, and buried in mass graves. Abduction and indoctrination of children was widespread, and many were persuaded or forced to commit atrocities. As of 2009, the Documentation Center of Cambodia has mapped 23,745 mass graves, containing approximately 1.3 million suspected victims of execution. Direct execution is believed to account for up to 60% of the genocide's death toll, with other victims succumbing to starvation, exhaustion, or disease. The genocide triggered a second outflow of refugees, many of whom escaped to neighboring Thailand and, to a lesser extent, Vietnam. In 2001, the Cambodian government established the Khmer Rouge Tribunal to try the members of the Khmer Rouge leadership responsible for the Cambodian genocide. Trials began in 2009, and in 2014, Nguyen Chia and Q Samphan were convicted and received life sentences for crimes against humanity committed during the genocide. In 1968, the Khmer Rouge officially launched a nationwide insurgency across Cambodia. Even though the government of North Vietnam had not been informed of the Khmer Rouge's decision, its forces provided shelter and weapons to the Khmer Rouge after the insurgency began. North Vietnamese support for the Khmer Rouge's insurgency made it impossible for the Cambodian military to effectively counter it. For the next 2 years, the insurgency grew because Norodom Sihanouk did very little to stop it. As the insurgency grew in strength, the party openly declared itself to be the Communist Party of Kampuchea. Sihanouk was deposed in 1970 by Premier Lon Nol, with the support of the National Assembly, establishing the pro-United States Khmer Republic. On the Chinese Communist Party (CCP)'s advice, Sihanouk, who was in exile in Beijing, formed an alliance with the Khmer Rouge, and became the nominal head of a Khmer Rouge-dominated government in exile, known by its French acronym, GRUNC, backed by China. Although thoroughly aware of the weakness of Lon Nol's forces and loath to commit American military force to the new conflict in any form other than air power, the Nixon administration announced its support for the new Khmer Republic. On March 29, 1970, North Vietnam launched an offensive against the Cambodian army. Documents which were uncovered from the Soviet Union's archives reveal that the invasion was launched at the Khmer Rouge's explicit request after negotiations were held with Nuon Chea. A North Vietnamese force quickly overran large parts of eastern Cambodia, reaching within 15 miles, 24 kilometers, of Phnom Penh before being pushed back. By June, 3 months after Sihanouk's removal, they had swept government forces from the entire northeastern third of the country. After defeating those forces, the Vietnamese turned the newly won territories over to the local insurgents. The Khmer Rouge also established liberated areas in the southern and southwestern parts of the country, where they operated independently of the Vietnamese. After Sihanouk demonstrated his support for the Khmer Rouge by visiting them in the field, their ranks swelled from 6,000 to 50,000 fighters. Many of the Khmer Rouge's new recruits were apolitical peasants who fought in support of the king, rather than for communism, of which they had little understanding. By 1975, with Lon Nol's government running out of ammunition due to its loss of U.S. support, it was clear that its collapse was imminent. On April 17, 1975, the Khmer Rouge captured Phnom Penh and ended the civil war. Mortality estimates for the Cambodian Civil War vary widely. Sihanouk used a figure of 600,000 Civil War deaths, while Elizabeth Becker reported over 1 million Civil War deaths, military and civilian included. Other researchers were unable to corroborate such high estimates. Marek Slawinski notes that many estimates of the dead are open to question and may have been used for propaganda, suggesting that the true number lies between 240,000 and 310,000. Judith Bannister and E. Page Johnson described 275,000 war deaths as the highest mortality that we can justify. Patrick Huveline states that subsequent re-evaluations of the demographic data situated the death toll for the Civil War in the order of 300,000 or less. From 1970 to 1973, a massive United States bombing campaign against the Khmer Rouge devastated rural Cambodia. An earlier U.S. bombing campaign of Cambodia began on March 18, 1969 with Operation Breakfast, but U.S. bombing in Cambodia had commenced years before that. The number of Cambodian civilian and Khmer Rouge deaths caused by U.S. bombing is disputed and difficult to disentangle from the broader Cambodian Civil War. Estimates range from 30,000 to 500,000. Slowinski estimates that approximately 17% of total Civil War deaths can be attributed to U.S. bombing, noting that this is far behind the leading causes of death, as the U.S. bombing was concentrated in underpopulated border areas. Ben Kiernan attributes 50,000 to 150,000 deaths to the U.S. bombing. The relationship between the United States' massive bombing of Cambodia and the growth of the Khmer Rouge in recruitment and popular support has been a matter of interest to historians. Some scholars, including Michael Ignatieff, Adam Jones, and Greg Grandin, have cited the United States intervention and bombing campaign from 1965 to 1973 as a significant factor that led to increased support for the Khmer Rouge among the Cambodian peasantry. According to Ben Kiernan, the Khmer Rouge would not have won power without U.S. economic and military destabilization of Cambodia. It used the bombing's devastation and massacre of civilians as recruitment propaganda and as an excuse for its brutal, radical policies and its purge of moderate communists and Sihanoukists. Pol Pot biographer David P. Chandler writes that the bombing had the effect the Americans wanted. It broke the communist encirclement of Phnom Penh, but also accelerated the collapse of rural society and increased social polarization. Craig Etchison agrees that U.S. intervention increased recruitment for the Khmer Rouge, but disputes that it was a primary cause of the Khmer Rouge victory. According to William Shawcross, the United States bombing and ground incursion plunged Cambodia into the chaos that Sihanouk had worked for years to avoid. Since the 1950s, Pol Pot had made frequent visits to the People's Republic of China, where he received political and military training, especially on the theory of the dictatorship of the proletariat, from the personnel of the CCP. From November 1965 to February 1966, high-ranking CCP officials such as Chen Boda and Zhang Chunxiao trained him on topics such as the Communist Revolution in China, class conflicts, Communist International, etc. Pol Pot also met with other officials, including Deng Xiaoping and Peng Zhen. He was particularly impressed by Kong Sheng's lecture on how to conduct a political purge. In 1970, Lon Nol overthrew Sihanouk, who fled to Beijing, where Pol Pot was also visiting. On the advice of the CCP, the Khmer Rouge changed its position, and in order to support Sihanouk, it established the National United Front of Kampuchea. In 1970 alone, the Chinese reportedly gave the United Front 400 tons of military aid. In April 1974, Sihanouk and Khmer Rouge leaders Ieng Sari and Khieu Samphan met with Mao in Beijing. Mao supported many of the policies proposed by the Khmer Rouge, but he did not want the Khmer Rouge to marginalize Sihanouk after they won the Civil War and established a new Cambodia. In June 1975, Pol Pot and other Khmer Rouge officials met with Mao Zedong in Beijing, where Mao lectured Pol Pot on his theory of continuing revolution under the dictatorship of the proletariat, recommending 2 articles which were written by Yao Wenyuan and sending Pol Pot over 30 books which were authored by Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, Vladimir Lenin, and Joseph Stalin as gifts. During this meeting, Mao said to Pol Pot, "We agree with you. Much of your experience is better than ours. China is not qualified to criticize you. We committed errors of the political roots for 10 times in 50 years, some are national, some are local. Thus I say China has no qualification to criticize you but to applaud you. You are basically correct. During the transition from the democratic revolution to adopting a socialist path, there exist 2 possibilities. One is socialism, the other is capitalism. Our situation now is like this. 50 years from now, or 100 years from now, the struggle between 2 lines will exist. Even 10,000 years from now, the struggle between 2 lines will still exist. When communism is realized, the struggle between 2 lines will still be there. Otherwise, you are not a Marxist. This is unity existing among opposites. If one mentions only one side of the 2, this is metaphysics. I believe in what Marx and Lenin have said, that path of advance would be tortuous. Our state now is, as Lenin said, a capitalist state without capitalists. This state protects capitalist rights, and the wages are not equal. Under the slogan of equality, a system of inequality has been introduced. There will exist a struggle between 2 lines, the struggle between the advanced and the backward, even when communism is realized. Today we cannot explain it completely." Pol Pot replied, "The issue of lines of struggle raised by Chairman Mao is an important strategic issue. We will follow your words in the future. I have read and learned various works of Chairman Mao since I was young, especially the theory on People's War. Your works have guided our entire party." On the other hand, during another meeting in August 1975, Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai warned Sihanouk as well as Khmer Rouge leaders, including Khieu Samphan and Ieng Sari, of the danger of radical movement towards communism, citing the mistakes in China's own Great Leap Forward. Zhou urged them not to repeat the mistakes that had caused havoc. Sihanouk later recalled that Khieu Samphan and Ieng Thirith responded only with an incredulous and superior smile. During the genocide, China was the largest military and economic supporter of the Khmer Rouge, supplying more than 15,000 military advisors and most of its external aid. It is estimated that at least 90% of foreign aid to Khmer Rouge came from China, with 1975 alone seeing $1 billion in interest-free economic and military aid, the biggest aid ever given to any one country by China. A series of internal crises in 1976 prevented Beijing from exerting substantial influence over Khmer Rouge policies. After Mao's death in September 1976, China underwent a 2-year transitionary period that ended with the appointment of Deng Xiaoping as its new paramount leader in December of 1978. During the transition period, Pol Pot made an official visit to China in July 1977, and he was welcomed by Chairman Hua Guofeng and other high-ranking CCP officials, with the People's Daily calling him the comrade from Cambodia. Pot also toured around the agricultural production model of Dazai, a product of Mao's era. Chen Yongui, vice premier of China and the leader of Dazai, visited Cambodia in December 1977, commending the achievement of its movement towards communism. In 1978, Sun Sen, a Khmer Rouge leader and the Minister of National Defense of Democratic Kampuchea, visited China and obtained its approval for military aid. In the same year, high-ranking CCP officials such as Wang Dongxing and Deng Ingchao visited Cambodia to offer support. Soon after Deng became the paramount leader of China, the Vietnamese invaded Cambodia and ended the genocide by defeating the Khmer Rouge in January 1979. The People's Republic of Kampuchea was then established. In order to counter the power of the Soviet Union and Vietnam in Southeast Asia, China officially condemned the Vietnamese invasion and continued its material support to the Khmer Rouge. In early 1979, China launched an invasion of Vietnam to retaliate against Vietnam's invasion of Cambodia. Deng was convinced by a conversation with Singapore's Prime Minister, Lee Kuan Yew, to limit the scale and duration of the war. Following the one-month war, Singapore attempted to serve as a mediator between Vietnam and China on the Cambodian issue. As a result of Chinese and Western opposition to the Vietnamese invasion of 1978 and 1979, the Khmer Rouge continued to hold Cambodia's United Nations (UN) seat until 1982, after which the seat was filled by a Khmer Rouge-dominated coalition which was known as the Coalition Government of Democratic Kampuchea (CGDK). Owing to support from China, Thailand, other Southeast Asian countries, the US, and some Western countries, the CGDK held Cambodia's UN seat until 1993, long after the Cold War had ended. China trained Khmer Rouge soldiers on its soil from 1979 to at least 1986, stationed military advisors with Khmer Rouge troops as late as 1990, and supplied at least $1 billion in military aid during the 1980s. There are allegations of United States support for the Khmer Rouge because they wished to weaken Vietnam's influence in Southeast Asia. The UK has also been accused of helping the group as the SAS trained non-Khmer Rouge soldiers of the CGDK coalition from 1985 to 1989 in Thailand. After the 1991 Paris Peace Accords, Thailand continued to allow the Khmer Rouge to trade and move across the Thai border to sustain their activities, although international criticism, particularly from the United States and Australia, caused it to disavow passing any direct military support. Ideology played an important role in the genocide. Pol Pot was influenced by Marxism-Leninism, and he wanted to transform Cambodia into an entirely self-sufficient agrarian socialist society that would be free from foreign influences. Stalin's work has been described as a crucial formative influence on his thought. Also heavily influential was Mao's work, particularly on New Democracy. Jean-Jacques Rousseau was one of his favorite authors, according to historian David Chandler, 1992, page 32. In the mid-1960s, Pol Pot reformulated his ideas about Marxism-Leninism to suit the Cambodian situation with goals such as bringing Cambodia back to an alleged mythic past of the powerful Khmer Empire, eradicating corrupting influences, such as foreign aid and Western culture, and restoring Cambodia's agrarian society. Pol Pot's strong belief that Cambodia needed to be transformed into an agrarian utopia stemmed from his experience in Cambodia's rural northeast, where he developed an affinity for the agrarian self-sufficiency of the area's isolated tribes, while the Khmer Rouge gained power. Attempts to implement these goals, formed upon the observations of small, rural communes, into a larger society were key factors in the ensuing genocide. One Khmer Rouge leader said that the killings were meant for the purification of the populace. The Khmer Rouge virtually forced Cambodia's entire population to divide itself into mobile work teams. Michael Hunt has written that it was an experiment in social mobilization unmatched in 20th century revolutions. The Khmer Rouge used an inhumane forced labor regime, starvation, forced resettlement, land collectivization, and state terror to keep the population in line. The Khmer Rouge's economic plan was aptly named the Mahalaut Plo, a direct allusion to the Great Leap Forward of China that caused tens of millions of deaths in the Great Chinese Famine. A doctoral dissertation written by Kenneth M. Quinn about the origins of the radical Pol Pot regime is widely acknowledged as the first person to report on the genocidal policies of Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge. While he was employed as a Foreign Service officer for the U.S. State Department in Southeast Asia, Quinn was stationed at the South Vietnamese border for 9 months between 1973 to 1974. While there, Quinn interviewed countless Cambodian refugees who had escaped the brutal clutches of the Khmer Rouge. Based upon the compiled interviews and the atrocities he witnessed firsthand, Quinn wrote a 40-page report about it, which was submitted throughout the U.S. government. In the report, he wrote that the Khmer Rouge had much in common with those of totalitarian regimes in Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. Quinn has written of the Khmer Rouge that had emerges as the explanation for the terror and violence that swept Cambodia during the 1970s is that a small group of alienated intellectuals, enraged by their perception of a totally corrupt society and imbued with a Maoist plan to create a pure socialist order in the shortest possible time, recruited extremely young, poor, and envious cadres, instructed them in harsh and brutal methods learned from Stalinist mentors, and used them to destroy physically the cultural underpinnings of the Khmer civilization and to impose a new society through purges, executions, and violence. Ben Kiernan has compared the Cambodian genocide to the Armenian genocide, which was perpetrated by the Ottoman Empire during World War I, and the Holocaust, which was perpetrated by Nazi Germany during World War II. While each genocide was unique, they shared certain common features, and racism was a major part of the ideology of all three regimes. All three regimes targeted religious minorities, and they also tried to use force in order to expand their rule into what they believed were their historic heartlands, the Khmer Empire, Turkestan, and Lebensraum, respectively, and all three regimes idealized their ethnic peasantry as the true national class, the ethnic soil from which the new state grew.